The story of Junko Furuta, a tragedy that shook Japan. It was a chilly November evening in 1988, and the streets of Misato, Japan, were wrapped in the quiet of dusk. Junko Furuta, a bright, cheerful 17-year-old high school student, walked home, her school bag swinging at her side. She was like any other teenager, full of dreams, laughter, and hope for the future. Her classmates admired her for her kindness, her teachers praised her for her diligence, and she looked forward to graduation with the promise of a new chapter. But fate had other plans. Darkness was watching, lurking in the shadows, and that darkness had a name. As she turned a quiet corner, Junko didn't notice the young man watching her from across the street. Hiroshi Miyano, a name that would soon become infamous. Hiroshi was not like Junko. He was part of a gang, a young man who wore cruelty like a badge of honor. But on that night, his cruelty turned into something even darker. He approached her, a fake smile hiding his intentions. "Lost?" he asked, his voice light, but his eyes cold. Junko smiled politely, shaking her head. "No, I'm fine. Just heading home." But home was a place she would never see again. Without warning, Hiroshi lunged. Junko's scream was muffled by his hand, and the quiet street seemed to swallow the sound. A motorcycle roared nearby, another of Hiroshi's gang members, ready and waiting. In a blur of chaos, Junko was forced onto the bike, her desperate struggles drowned by the wind. They took her to an ordinary house, a house that looked like any other in the quiet suburb, but which would become a place of horror, a place where Junko's life would be shattered. Inside the house, she was dragged to a dark room. Other faces loomed over her: Nobuharu Minato, Yasushi Watanabe, Joe Ogura. Faces she didn't know, but whose cruelty she would soon understand. "You thought you could just walk home?" one of them sneered. "You thought the world was safe?" Junko begged, her voice breaking. "Please, please let me go. I won't tell anyone." But her pleas only drew laughter. The four boys, just teenagers themselves, had no intention of letting her go. They saw her fear, and it gave them a sense of power, a twisted, monstrous power. Days turned to nights, and nights became a nightmare without end. The boys kept her imprisoned, hidden in the house that seemed so ordinary from the outside. But within those walls, cruelty knew no bounds. They beat her, starved her, and tortured her. Her cries for help were silenced by fists. Her desperate attempts to escape were met with even greater brutality. "No one's coming for you," they would whisper, their voices cruel. "No one cares." But they were wrong. People did care. Junko's parents, her friends. They searched, they pleaded with the police. They put up posters, their hearts breaking with each passing day. But in a world of bureaucracy and cold procedures, the police failed them. They failed Junko. Reports were filed, but the boys lied. They told their own parents that she was a runaway, a girl staying by choice. And so the world turned a blind eye. The boys' cruelty only grew. They turned Junko's suffering into a twisted game. They forced her to call her parents, to tell them she was safe, staying with a friend. Her voice, weak and trembling, was enough to momentarily calm their fears. But in her heart, Junko's hope faded. The days stretched on, each one darker than the last. Her body bore the marks of their hatred, her spirit slowly crushed beneath the weight of their violence. And yet, even in the darkness, a spark remained. Junko refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She refused to become the helpless victim they wanted. Her spirit, though battered, clung to life. She would look at them, her swollen eyes fierce, her voice a whisper of defiance. "One day," she whispered, "you will pay for this." But for now she was trapped. Her world was a tiny, dark room, her days a blur of suffering. And beyond the thin walls of that ordinary house, the world continued, unaware of the horror hidden within. But darkness has a way of spreading, and secrets cannot be hidden forever. In the quiet of that hellish house, the seeds of tragedy were sown. But they would not remain buried. Time became a cruel joke for Junko Furuta. Days bled into nights, but there was no difference. The darkness was constant, in the room, in the eyes of her captors, in the pain that never ceased. But what began as a sick game for the four boys soon became something even more monstrous. Their cruelty grew, fueled by a twisted hunger for power. They invited other boys, other monsters, into the house. They turned Junko's suffering into a spectacle. More faces leered at her, more hands struck her, more voices mocked her screams. "You still think you're strong?" Hiroshi sneered, gripping her by the hair, forcing her to look at the other boys laughing. "You think someone is coming for you?" Junko's lips trembled, but she said nothing. Her silence was her last shield, her final act of defiance. But even that was a spark they tried to snuff out. They humiliated her, degraded her, forced her to do the unthinkable. They shattered the windows of her hope again and again, with fists, with words, with unimaginable cruelty. Outside, the world remained oblivious. Her parents continued their desperate search, their voices breaking as they pleaded with anyone who would listen. Flyers with her smiling face fluttered on telephone poles, a picture of a girl full of life, a girl who was now a prisoner of horror. The police, tangled in their own incompetence, wrote it off as a runaway case. They had no idea that Junko's cries for help were muffled just a few miles from her own home. But inside that cursed house, the boys celebrated their impunity. "No one cares about you," Nobuharu taunted, his voice a cold whisper in her ear. "We can do whatever we want. No one is coming." And in their twisted minds, this became a challenge, to see how far they could go, to see how much they could make her suffer before the light in her eyes finally went out. They beat her with iron bars, they burned her skin, they starved her, they forced her to consume unimaginable filth. Her body became a canvas of bruises, burns, and broken bones, and yet she lived. "Why don't you just die?" Joe Ogura hissed one night, his frustration a venomous growl. "You ruin our fun by crying all the time." But Junko refused. Even as her body weakened, even as her voice grew faint, she did not give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg for death. Her defiance was a tiny ember, a flicker that refused to be extinguished, and that only enraged them further. The boys grew bolder, their cruelty a twisted addiction. They brought in strangers, other boys from the neighborhood, inviting them to join in their monstrous game. They bragged about their captive, but when a few showed hesitation, when one even considered calling the police, they were threatened into silence. "Speak a word, and you'll end up just like her," Hiroshi warned, his eyes cold. And so the silence of complicity spread, a darkness that swallowed any chance of rescue. But even in the depths of that darkness, whispers of guilt began to creep in. One of the boys, Yasushi Watanabe, would sometimes sit in the corner, watching as the others tormented her, his face pale, his hands shaking. "This is too much," he muttered once, but Hiroshi's fist met his jaw. "Shut up," Hiroshi snarled. "She's nothing. She's just a toy." And yet, as Junko lay curled on the cold, dirty floor, her breath ragged, her body shattered, her spirit whispered something different. "I am not nothing," she whispered in the darkness, her voice so faint it was almost a thought. "I am not nothing." Days turned to weeks, 40 days of horror, 40 days where hope seemed like a forgotten dream. Junko's body, once full of life, was a fragile shell. Her beautiful face was swollen, bruised, her fingers broken. But her mind, her spirit, though battered, was not broken. And that spirit became a mirror that showed the boys their own monstrosity. In her suffering, they saw their own darkness, but they did not stop. They couldn't. They were trapped in the hell they had created, and Junko was the burning ember at its center. One cold night, as the wind howled outside, Hiroshi stared at her, something close to fear in his eyes. "Why won't you just die?" he whispered, his voice trembling. But Junko looked at him, her swollen eyes blazing with a fierce light. "Because I'm still alive," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "And you are already dead." Her words cut through the darkness, a sliver of light in the endless night. But they were also a spark that ignited the final terrible act of cruelty. Furious, desperate to silence her, the boys unleashed their full hatred. They beat her, kicked her, set her legs on fire, crushed her fingers beneath iron weights. They laughed, but their laughter was thin, strained, a mask for the fear gnawing at their hearts. Fear that they were not just hurting a girl. They were destroying their own souls. And in that hell, Junko's spirit, though it flickered, refused to die. Even as her voice faded, even as her strength waned, she remained. She was a light in the darkness, and her suffering became a scar they would never escape. But darkness cannot last forever, and even the most twisted cruelty has consequences. Secrets can only be buried for so long. The air inside the cursed house was thick with the stench of blood, sweat, and smoke. A heavy, suffocating darkness pressed against the walls. And yet, beyond those walls, the world was oblivious. Neighbors walked their dogs, children laughed in the park, and the city of Misato continued, unaware of the horror hiding within. But inside that house, the darkness had begun to turn against itself. Junko's body lay curled on the filthy mattress, her skin a patchwork of bruises, burns, and cuts. Her breath was a thin, fragile whisper. Her eyes, swollen and red, stared at the ceiling, unseeing. But she was not gone. Not yet. Not as long as she could still whisper. "Please, please, help. Someone." But her voice was lost in the chaos. Hiroshi stormed into the room, his face twisted with anger. "Why isn't she dead yet?" he spat, his voice a growl. "She should be dead by now." "She's tougher than you think," Nobuharu muttered, lighting another cigarette, his eyes avoiding the broken figure on the floor. "Tougher? No, she's cursed," Yasushi whispered, his voice trembling. He stood by the door, his arms wrapped around himself. "I can't do this anymore. I can't even look at her." "Then don't look!" Joe snapped, kicking a chair over. "Go hide in the corner like a coward." But Yasushi's eyes were wide, a cold sweat on his face. "No. Don't you see? She's a ghost. We hurt her, we burn her, but she won't die. She won't stop staring." Hiroshi's face twisted. "Shut up! She's nothing. Just a girl. Just a stupid, weak girl." But even as he spoke, his hands trembled. He looked at Junko's swollen face, her lips moving, whispering the same faint, trembling words. "You will pay. Stop it!" Hiroshi lunged forward, grabbing her by the hair, jerking her head up. "Stop whispering that! Stop it!" But Junko's eyes, though barely open, locked on his. Her lips cracked, her voice a faint breath. "You will pay. Shut up! Shut up!" Hiroshi's voice was a frantic shout now, his grip tightening. "Why won't you just die? Why won't you just disappear?" Nobuharu grabbed his shoulder. "Hey! Enough! You'll kill her!" "So what?" Hiroshi screamed, pushing him away. "She should be dead already, but she won't die. She just keeps looking at me, whispering, like she's laughing at me." "Maybe she is," Yasushi muttered, his voice cold. "Maybe she knows something we don't." The room fell silent. Even Joe's cruel grin wavered. For the first time, fear was a shadow on their faces. This was supposed to be a game, a cruel game, yes, but a game they controlled. But Junko, broken, bleeding, barely alive, still stared at them, still whispered, "You will pay." Hiroshi's face paled, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. We have to get rid of her, burn her, bury her, something." But Nobuharu stepped back, shaking his head. "No, no. If we do that, they'll know. They'll find out. They'll arrest us." "They won't find out if she's gone," Hiroshi screamed. "They won't find out if there's nothing left." But the door burst open, and a voice cut through the chaos. "What the hell is going on here?" It was Minato's father, his eyes narrowing at the scene. But Hiroshi was quick, his voice a smooth lie. "Nothing, just a friend, a girl who's staying with us." "Staying with you?" The man's gaze flicked to Junko's shattered form, and for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. But then Hiroshi smiled, a fake, easy smile. "She got into a fight. Her parents kicked her out. We're just helping her out." Minato's father frowned, but then shrugged. "Whatever, just keep it down. I don't want the neighbors complaining." He slammed the door, and his footsteps faded down the hall. Silence. The boys stared at each other, a cold sweat on their faces. Yasushi's voice was a whisper. This is wrong. This is a nightmare." "It's only a nightmare if you wake up," Hiroshi snapped, but his voice was shaking. We can still fix this. We can fix this?" Joe laughed, a wild, desperate sound. "She's dying, and if she dies, they'll know. Everyone will know." Junko's voice was a faint, broken whisper. "You will pay." "Shut up!" Hiroshi screamed, his hands gripping his head. "Stop whispering that! Stop it! I'm not afraid of you! You're nothing! Nothing!" But even as he screamed, even as the boys argued, Junko's whisper continued, a faint, haunting echo. Her broken spirit had become a shadow that clung to them, a cold breath against their necks, a reminder of their own monstrous cruelty. And in that darkness, fear grew, not just for Junko's life, but for their own. The house, which had once been their playground of cruelty, became a prison. The air was thick, suffocating. The walls seemed to press in. Every sound, every creak, every whisper of the wind seemed to whisper the same cursed words. "You will pay." And outside, the world continued. Junko's parents, broken with grief, still searched, still pleaded with the police. Friends whispered about her disappearance. Her teachers wondered, but no one knew the truth. Not yet. But darkness cannot last forever. Secrets can only be buried for so long. And the boys who had thought themselves untouchable were beginning to see the shadow of their own guilt. They were not just tormenting a girl, they were destroying themselves. Fear turned the air inside the house thick and suffocating. Junko's broken body lay in the darkness, her voice a faint, trembling whisper that seemed to echo off the walls. "You will I pay?" But the boys, who once laughed at her suffering, now trembled. Their cruelty, once a game, had become a curse they could not escape. But why? Why did they do this? Why did 4 boys, Hiroshi Miyano, Nobuharu Minato, Yasushi Watanabe, and Joe Ogura, turn a bright, innocent girl's life into a nightmare? Hiroshi was the spark, the boy who started it all. A young man with a hunger for power, desperate to prove himself. He was part of a gang, a world of violence and dominance where cruelty was a currency. To him, Junko was a way to prove his strength, a victim who would make him feared. But beneath his bravado was a coward, a boy who needed to make others suffer to feel strong. The others followed. Nobuharu, with his cruel laughter, found in Junko a way to escape his own emptiness. Yasushi, who once hesitated, stayed out of fear of Hiroshi's rage. He was too weak to help her, too afraid to leave. And Joe, he was chaos, a boy who laughed at pain because it made him feel alive. But there was something darker, something they all shared, a desperate need for control. To them, Junko was not a person. She was a toy, a victim who made them feel powerful in a world where they felt powerless. But power built on cruelty is an illusion. And as days turned to weeks, their laughter faded. The house became a prison, each corner a shadow that seemed to whisper Junko's cursed words. You will pay. They began to fight with each other. Hiroshi snapped at Joe, accusing him of being too rough. Nobuharu punched Yasushi for suggesting they should stop. Fear gnawed at them, but pride and hatred kept them trapped. And then it happened. After 44 days of unimaginable suffering, Junko's body finally gave out. Her breath, a faint, trembling whisper, fell silent. The light in her swollen eyes faded. The room was silent. The boys stared, their faces pale, their breaths sharp and ragged. For a moment there was nothing but silence, the silence of death. She's dead," Yasushi whispered, his voice a trembling gasp. What do we do?" Hiroshi's face was a mask of panic. We get rid of her! We can't let anyone know!" "Bury her?" Joe stammered, his bravado gone. "They'll find her." "No. Burn her. Make her disappear," Nobuharu whispered, his voice a desperate hiss. Panic turned to frenzy. They wrapped her broken body in blankets, shoved it into a drum, and filled it with concrete. Her life, her suffering, buried in a cold, silent tomb. But even as they tried to hide their crime, fear clawed at their hearts. They thought they were erasing her. But Junko was not gone. She was there, in their minds, in their nightmares. Her voice whispered in the darkness, "You will pay." The drum was dumped, forgotten in an empty lot. They thought they were safe, but secrets cannot stay buried forever. Weeks later, the police, acting on a tip, discovered the drum. When they pried it open, the truth came spilling out, a truth so dark it shocked all of Japan. The boys were arrested. The truth of Junko's suffering spread like wildfire, a tale of horror that stunned the world. But the most terrible truth was this: even when they were caught, even when they stood in court, the boys showed no remorse. They laughed, they sneered, they hid behind their age, their youth becoming a shield. Their sentences were light, too light for the monstrous crime they had committed. Families wept, the nation cried out, but justice seemed a distant dream. But Junko's story did not disappear. It became a legend, a story of innocence destroyed, of cruelty that shocked a nation. A story of a girl who refused to die even in the face of unimaginable darkness. And it became a warning of what happens when cruelty is allowed to fester, when good people stay silent, when the powerful abuse the weak. But Junko Furuta was not just a victim. She was a spark, a light that refused to be snuffed out. And even in her suffering, she left behind a message that even in the darkest shadows, even in the face of unbearable pain, there is a strength that cannot be broken, a spirit that will not be silenced. To those who listen now, remember her name, Junko Furuta, a name that should never be forgotten, a life taken, but a spirit that endures. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to the darkness that can exist, please honor Junko's memory by choosing kindness, by standing against cruelty wherever you see it, and let her whisper become a voice that speaks for those who cannot. Thank you for watching this story. If you found it powerful, please give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truths of our world, the light and the darkness.